Hi everyone, welcome back to Numinosophy Academy. I'm Lewis. I think one of the big issues that a lot of Mormons struggle to reconcile themselves to is the whole polygamy issue, right? Joseph Smith and his 40-odd wives. But perhaps more troubling than that was the fact that one of those wives, one of the women that he married, was a 14-year-old girl. And, a lot of Mormons find that very troubling. And, a lot of ex-Mormons or, people that have never been Mormons look at that with, exasperation, disgust. What the hell do you make of that fact that Joseph Smith was married to a 14-year-old girl? So I'm going to be reacting to one of David's episodes on Saints Unscripted, in which he, tackles this issue head on. So, let's hear him out.
Hey guys, so despite the fact that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints stopped practicing plural marriage over 100 years ago, the fact that it was once a thing is still understandably hard for people to digest, myself included. As I mentioned in the last episode we did about polygamy, I don't like this subject. I'd bet most Latter-day Saints today don't like it. That said, it's part of our history, so we've got to own it.
Two thoughts. First of all, this idea that there's a hard divide in 1890 and it's being practiced up to 1890, then 1890 comes and it's never practiced, that doesn't hold up. It's more of a kind of fizzle out after 1890. There were still people entering into plural marriages that were Mormons, part of the LDS Church, after 1890. That's the first thing. The second thing, this kind of hard divide that he's making between, it being this uncomfortable part of LDS history that we now need to kind of reconcile ourselves to because it's part of our history. Well, that doesn't really hold up either, because plural marriage is part, intrinsically part of LDS theology. It's still in the, Doctrine and Covenants. And, there are many Mormons today that believe that if they are sealed to one wife and that wife dies and then they get sealed to a second wife, they are de facto within a plural marriage when they get up there to the celestial kingdom.
But while I still have lots of questions about plural marriage, there are also lots of rumors and misconceptions about the practice that we can address. One subject of considerable controversy is Joseph Smith's plural marriage to 14-year-old Helen Mar Kimball. So that is what we're going to talk about in this episode. Alright guys, so here's where the rubber meets the road. People are uncomfortable with the fact that Joseph Smith married a 14-year-old, mainly because marriage usually implies a sexual relationship, and Joseph Smith having a sexual relationship with a 14-year-old sounds super inappropriate.
So, just some thoughts on the strategy here. I find it interesting that when it comes to some issues, those at Fair Mormon, those at Saints Unscripted are more than willing to play the prophets are fallible card, right? So when it comes to like the racism stuff, when it comes to blood atonement stuff, various different issues, when it comes to, Joseph Smith not upholding the word of wisdom. These are all examples that Fair Mormon, Saints Unscripted are more than happy to point to as the fallibility of prophets. However, when it comes to the marriage of Joseph Smith to a 14-year-old girl, they're much more inclined to play it is above board. I know it sounds weird, but it is above board. And if only you understand the kind of nuance and, particular sense in which it was understood by Joseph Smith, you will see as well that it is actually okay. Which I find weird. I find it weird that they, kind of openly enter into that strategy. Wouldn't it just be much easier to play the fallibility card on this one as well? But, they don't want to do that for some reason.
So, for the record, while there's not enough evidence to prove anything, what we do know suggests that the relationship between Joseph and Helen was very likely not sexual. Helen was sealed to Joseph about 13 months before Joseph was killed.
So, that is correct. There is no evidence. There's no evidence in terms of DNA evidence. We don't have any children born from Joseph Smith that were not Emma's children, right? So there's no lineage in that sense. There's no accounts from any of these women, I believe, talking about their sexual relations with Joseph Smith. Although, to be honest, why would there be? It's not the kind of thing that people tend to write about. It's obviously possible for relationships to be sexual, but children not to come forth. This is obviously before contraception, but you could have had, everything but intercourse, so that it doesn't rule that out. So it's just a question of, how likely is that?
During that time, Helen continued to live at home with her parents. Brian Hales, who we've had on the show, said Helen wrote more about plural marriage than any other female author in the 19th century, defending it and Joseph Smith. Through those pages, Helen never describes even one time being alone with the prophet without a chaperone.
Yeah, as I said, because you just wouldn't write about it, would you? And as for her continuing to live at home, yeah, but, it's because Emma Smith wouldn't have any of the other wives living under her roof. So I don't think any of the polygamous wives, normatively stayed with Joseph Smith. I think, one of the issues around this, I think, is we obviously look at this now from our 21st century vantage. And, when it comes to issues of consent, when it comes to issues of the abuse of women, hashtag Me Too, etc., etc., in the 21st century, we are way more conscious of this stuff than, even people were a few decades ago. So if you go back to the time of Joseph Smith, we're just in such culturally different circumstances. It's really difficult to judge then by now. Okay? So in 19th century America, polygamy was really taboo. Okay? There's no debating that, right? This is why, it's a large part of why the Mormons were persecuted. However, marriage with someone as young as 14, yeah, that wasn't so much of a taboo, right? There wasn't consent in the same way, but, people being married as young as 12, 13, 14, that was known to happen in the early mid 19th century. It's not until you get to the very end of the 19th century and begin crossing into the 20th century that, consciousness around this issue really starts to rise, which brings consent up, first up to 16 and then up to 18. And then, it obviously varies from place to place, state to state, etc. So, if we kind of take polygamy as sexual relationships in which Joseph Smith believes he is, ordained of God to marry multiple women and that marriage is going to be consummated, then I don't think the idea of that precluding girls as young as 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 is necessarily, it's a problem, right? It's not a problem in the way that we think about it as being a problem today, which is not to say it happened. It's not to say that it was consummated, right? Because obviously the Fair Mormons and Saints Unscripted want to lean really heavily into the fact that there is no evidence. So
Helen herself defended Joseph's motives, saying if Joseph had had any impure desires, he could have gratified them in the style of the world with less danger of his life or his character than to do as he did. And for
really? I mean, depends what your kink is, really, doesn't it? If your kink is being a prophet and having sex with 14-year-old girls that believe you are a messenger of God, then that's quite a difficult kink to fulfill in any other way than this. Getting the parents to acknowledge this divine principle, that you're marrying into the family of the prophet being sealed into celestial kingdom.
For more information suggesting that their relationship was likely not sexual, check out the notes in the YouTube description of this video. It's also important to recognize that Joseph was not courting Helen. In fact, marrying Helen was not even Joseph's idea. It was her father's idea, Heber C. Kimball. He taught me the principle of celestial marriage, and having a great desire to be connected with the prophet Joseph, he offered me to him.
I mean, that's hardly better. You know, old men in rooms together, smoking their cigars, discussing who they're going to marry daughters to. Yeah? You know, the idea came from father to daughter, fine, but you don't know the genesis of that idea. You know, he was obviously taught the idea by Joseph Smith. You know, we can presume that, I imagine.
My father introduced to me this principle and asked me if I would be sealed to Joseph, who came next morning, and with my parents, I heard him teach and explain the principle of celestial marriage. And forming an eternal family connection really was the purpose of this marriage. Helen's son, Orson Whitney, described Helen's marriage to Joseph as a golden link whereby the houses of Heber and Joseph were indissolubly and forever joined.
Yeah, so how is that not religious coercion? Right? If you create a religious system in which this 14-year-old girl will be saved and enter into the celestial kingdom if she marries me, she's a 14-year-old girl, right? So, you know, again, by today's standards, she couldn't possibly consent to that, right? Does it, you know, imagine, you know, someone in the 21st century, you know, an older man wanting to marry a 14-year-old girl, but saying, oh, no, there won't be any sex because it's going to be a spiritual marriage. You know, that's not going to make people go, oh, okay, then. Well, then that's fine, right? It's just as much of a problem. And, you know, the fact that it's not just the salvation of this 14-year-old girl, but her family as well, right? The pressure. It's unbelievable amount of pressure to put on a 14-year-old girl. You know, if you do not marry the prophet, you are, you know, putting into question the salvific state of your parents. Do you want your parents to not receive the celestial kingdom?
Some of Joseph's plural marriages were for time or mortal life only, some were for time and eternity, and some were for eternity only. Helen's marriage was probably meant for time and eternity, but due to her young age, it seems that for all intents and purposes, the marriage was largely treated as an eternity-only marriage, similar to some of his marriages to women on the opposite end of the age spectrum, like 56-year-old Fanny Young or 58-year-old Rhoda Richards. Now, clearly Helen's father wanted the best for Helen and believed that this was it, but that understandably didn't make it easy for Helen. And in her writing, she talks about how she thought herself a much abused child because after her marriage to Joseph, she wasn't allowed to be as socially involved as her peers, suggesting that she may not have fully understood the social implications of the marriage at the time. And later in life, Helen did acknowledge that at the time she was too young or too foolish to comprehend and appreciate all that she heard Joseph Smith teach.
Yeah, so she basically acknowledges the fact that she was coerced, right? She thinks in retrospect that move was wrong for her to make. And had she been older, had she been more mature, she wouldn't have made that mistake.
Teach. Latter-day Saints consider eternal marriage to be an ordinance necessary for exaltation, assuming the parties involved stay true to the covenants they make. But there is some controversy surrounding Helen's understanding of what her sealing to Joseph meant for her in the eternities. She remembers Joseph saying at the time, "If you will take this step, it will ensure your eternal salvation and exaltation, and that of your father's household and all of your kindred. This promise was so great that I willingly gave myself to purchase so glorious a reward." Now, obviously, Helen was under some pressure from her father to accept the marriage, and Joseph's status as the prophet surely added pressure. But some people point to this quote as evidence that Joseph coerced Helen into the marriage with the promise of unconditional exaltation. I find that conclusion unlikely, because on the very next page of Helen's recollection, she references the promises Joseph made to her and says that, "With the help of our Heavenly Father, I am determined to so live that I can claim those promises."
That doesn't make it not coercive, right? Just because she continues to, believe the religious coercion she was subjected to, and continues to believe that the principle is defensible, that doesn't mean she wasn't coerced, right? You can have both of those at the same time.
Suggesting that she was aware that those promises were not without conditions. Also, Helen's parents were present when Joseph made these promises. Helen was sealed to Joseph in May 18...
Yeah, also. Yeah. So the whole family believed that this was ensuring their entry into the celestial kingdom. Again, that doesn't make this better.
43, and we have a June letter from her mother and a July letter from her father that pretty clearly show that they also did not consider anyone's exaltation to be guaranteed through marriage. But you're certainly free to come to your own conclusions. My personal conclusion is that while this marriage was understandably hard for Helen, it wasn't the product of Joseph Smith being creepy, but was rather a way for the Kimball family and the Smith family to be connected after this life. After Joseph died, Helen was remarried to Horace Whitney, who also later practiced polygamy. While it was oftentimes a heart-wrenching practice, she defended it. She wrote, "I did not try to conceal the fact of plural marriage having been a trial, but confessed that it had been one of the severest of my life, but that it had also proven one of the greatest of blessings."
I guess the thing I find most surprising is what I said at the beginning, the fact that the Saints Unscripted, Fair Mormon play when it comes to marriage to this 14-year-old girl, we just don't really understand it card, but I'm sure it's above board, as opposed to he was a fallible prophet card. That's weird. Especially as we move into the 21st century and become, increasingly conscious of the marginalized state of women, suppressing the female voice. It's odd that they would want to continue to defend him in this area. Anyway, that is all I have for you. Thanks for watching. Please do like this video for the YouTube algorithm. Please do subscribe and click that bell so that you don't miss out on future upcoming videos. Cheers again, and I will see you in the next one.